Come back for our final session of the day. Thank you. So I hope you all agree this has been a remarkable day on many, many levels. Lots of energy, lots of good insight, and we wanted to conclude the day with a discussion with two folks who need no introduction in this group, Michael Horn and Paula Blank. Michael, his recent book, Choosing College, which was just released like yesterday or something, or tomorrow. That's probably not even released yet. Yeah, first day, right there. But an incredibly important piece of research, particularly for those of us who are very interested in kind of the dissemination and operationalization of innovation in a way that really want to sort of take this and turn this into strategy and turn this into action. So we're very grateful for the work, very grateful that you could come up and spend some time with us. Everyone should have received a copy of this book as well. So if you did not, also if you'd like to maybe grab one or two more, if you have some colleagues that you think would be useful, please let us know because we have some more because just really think it's important that we leave here with these kind of insights. But I will say not much more other than just our format. Michael's going to give us kind of a quick overview of the book and some introductory thoughts. Paul's going to offer a response, and then we wanted to spend plenty of time for questions and answers. So we have Meredith and Gabby who are here, and so once we get to the Q&A portion, they will walk around with microphones. Otherwise, thank you both.
Well, first, just a huge thank you. Brian read an early manuscript of the book when it was a Google Doc. He reminds me, as did Paul actually. And and to be literally, I think you're the first books that have come off the printing press, Brian. So you got them before anyone else. So hopefully you'll actually enjoy them and not use them for other things that paper can be used for. But no, it's fun to be here. I want to say up front as we frame the conversation, I think often jobs to be done theory. How many people are familiar with jobs to be done theory? It's about 3/4 of the room. I think it's often thought of as a marketing concept, that marketing, traditional marketing as it's been practiced, isn't the right way to view the world, that sampling on demographics or product categories tends to mislead. And therefore, if you just understood jobs to be done, you could create better advertisements, better campaigns and things like that. And I actually think it's been misunderstood in that way, that jobs to be done is really not a marketing concept. Marketing is an outgrowth of it, but it's really a fundamental design concept. And I think of it, you all are familiar with design thinking, I think of it as the front end to design thinking. So a job to be done is really the progress that someone is trying to make in a given situation. And that situation or context or circumstance is so important because depending on the circumstance you're in, you can prioritize certain things. You have to make certain trade-offs. You don't have unlimited time, budget, and so forth. And jobs thinking really tries to hone in on that circumstance and the progress you're trying to make within it. And what does success look like given where you are right now? So given the square you are right now in the game of life, what does progress and what does a successful outcome look like? And in that way, it differentiates a little bit from design thinking, which sort of says you interview for empathy and look at needs. But needs are sort of always present in people's lives. And it's the situation or the context that helps you understand what trade-offs someone is willing to make, what can they or can't they prioritize. And once you understand that, then you can get into the design thinking process of iteration and prototyping and so forth, testing and learning to figure out, have we really delivered on the experiences that people need to be able to make that progress in their life? And then as you start to understand the experiences, what are the actual features and how do we package them up and so forth? And then that extends all the way into how do we actually talk about these services and products and so forth. And really but it all comes down to experiences. And so I guess the next thing that comes to mind is a question that where's Jeff Young? There you are. A question that I think a lot of people are going to ask as they interview around this is why apply this theory to higher ed? Because it's such a consumer product focused theory historically. And in many ways, I actually think it's more tailor built for higher ed than say some of the places where my co-author Bob Mesta has used it to help Wrigley's build better chewing gum and things like that. Which is to say that it's really about the set of experiences that you need to make progress. And at the end of the day, I think education, it's not really a product or a service, it's a set of experiences that help advance a learner in their life. And that's not just academically, frankly, it's also growing through social and emotional parts of their life. And Jobs to be Done says, hey, functional pieces of one's life is important, but it's actually as important or even more important to understand the social and emotional dimensions of what is causing people to take action in their life. And so in many ways, I think higher ed is actually more situated for this theory than many of the other places it's been framed. What I will say is that the research started out of a question that we had at the Christensen Institute when I was full-time there, which was we had this nagging suspicion, which Paul had way before us, but that universities were serving students with lots of different jobs to be done in their lives, so that they were all coming with different jobs. And universities were trying to optimize for all these different jobs and sort of becoming one-size-fits-none places, if you will. And they weren't optimized for any one job to be done. And as a result, that meant they were delivering subpar experiences to lots of different students in lots of different circumstances. And it was also driving a lot of administrative and overhead complexity, just trying to coordinate with things that were fundamentally pulling against each other and going opposite ways. And so that was a hypothesis we had. And as we dug in, we did several hundred Jobs to be Done interviews, which basically entails having a person who has recently made a decision recreate the movie, if you will, of how they made a decision. So you can start to see what are the forces that are pushing them and pulling them toward making a change, and what are the anxieties and habits that are holding them back from making that change. We did several hundred of these interviews with students, and we've continued to do so after the books come out, interestingly enough. But and ultimately found what we call 5 jobs to be done that we found that you can read in the book. But just to give you the quick summary, the first one is what we're calling Help Me Get Into My Best College. So these are students for whom the act of getting into the best for them is really what the job is all about. When I shipped this book out to a few admissions officers at colleges, they said, it's a really interesting book you've written, but I kind of hate that first job to be done you found, and I just can't put my name on to endorsing this. And on the one hand, I sort of hear them, because it feels a little bit vacuous as you read through it. I will tell you candidly, like when I looked back at my experience, and I got interviewed as part of it by some of our researchers, when I went to college and even when I went to business school, I was clearly in this job. It was all about getting into the best for its own sake. I would have told you something different till I was blue in the face if you had talked to me. But when you looked at what I actually did, not what I said, it's so clear that I fit into this job to be done. And so that's the other point I guess I'd make, which is these aren't jobs as we wish that people lived lives, but they are just how they live life. And they're just sort of reflect what is causing them to take action, not necessarily what we might want them to do. Really briefly, the other 4, Help Me Do What's Expected of Me is the second job we found. These are students who are going to college because someone else in their life expects them to, and they're sort of fulfilling that expectation. The third one, Help Me Get Away. So these are students who are running from something that may resonate with some of you. It turns out in the book, the research, it's a pretty poor reason to go to a 4-year college because you don't know why you're going. You don't have an intrinsic reason for being there. It's all about the act of running from something, not necessarily towards something. The fourth one, Help Me Step It Up. Paul will probably talk more about these students, but these are students who, as Paul would say, have had all the, what is it, have had all that life, all the coming of age they can handle. Thank you. And they just, they look around themselves and they're ready to step it up. This isn't who I am. It's now or never. I'm going to make a change, and education is the pathway to get me there. And I want the most direct, straightest route to lifting up my life and those around me. And then the last one, what we're calling Help Me Extend Myself. So these are students who are in a relatively okay place, but there's something more that they want. There's a yearning. They want to learn more. They want to challenge themselves in some ways, and they're going to take what for them is a relatively low risk decision to learn more about it. Hopefully that gives you a quick summary. What I would just say is absent from that, and I think it's worth calling out in this group, is you didn't hear me say help me get a career, or help me land my first job, or help me switch careers, or something like that. And there's just so much conversation right now in higher ed with the UCLA freshman survey and so forth, that the purpose of higher education is very narrowly just to get a job. And I will tell you, that's part of what we heard in all those, but it's a very small part, and it's not the causality that causes someone to make a decision to go or to switch schools or to choose a different college. It's not that these return on investment questions for students are irrelevant. I think they're highly present in their parent minds. But that's not how the students themselves are making choices, and it's not how they're experiencing life or talking about it with their language. This is language that other people are using to describe them, not the students themselves. And so I just want to make that point, because I think it's a different one from the narrative we've been fed, and it's certainly one that Clay Christensen and we've been guilty of writing over the years. We speculate, that people go to college for these jobs, and it's just not what we actually found when we did the research itself. So maybe that's a good point to turn it over to Paul about how you've used the thinking.
Thank you, Michael. First, I also want to thank you. It's such a treat for us to have the folks in this room join us here in Manchester, New Hampshire. There are people who, like Josh, I read all the time, and inside higher ed, like, what's he get to say today about OPMs? I'm curious, and other things. And good friends from ASU and Entangled and WG. We just learned so much by having you here, so thank you. It's a treat. It's like Christmas to have this group of people here for us. So Jobs to be Done is something we embraced heartily when we set out to grow our online programs some years ago now. And I often say, when people ask about that story, I think, Jeff, you asked about that story once in a Chronicle interview we did together. The first part of that was really not very sexy work, because it was actually getting under the hood to change all of these business rules and processes and administrative rules that we had that were great for 18-year-olds who had a certain kind of job they needed from us, but were terrible for an adult who was 35 with a couple of kids, stuck in a job, had credits from 3 other schools. And when we were asking our 18-year-olds if they were transferring in from another school to get official transcripts so we could look at that, we could do a transfer credit evaluation, that worked fine for them. They just walked across campus and went to the registrar's office to get that. But when we asked for an adult, like, what's a registrar again? And it's 4:30 and I have to get my kids, and what time's that office closed? And wait a minute, they need $10. And we weren't built for that. They weren't built for that. So there was just there were probably 3, 4, 5 years of the non-sexy work. I'm looking at some of the people who were on that journey with us on my team, before we could get to thinking about how do we bring these offerings out to the world at large, and then getting really, really focused on our adult learners and treating them very differently than the students you see on this campus who are here for something very different, as Michael so aptly points out. And it's really probably the question we use now for almost every new venture. It starts with a jobs to be done question. And that can sometimes be an internal project, but often it's not. It's also how we can move out into the world. So if we acquired LRNG, which is a not-for-profit based in Chicago. It serves 55,000 opportunity youth, probably the same definition you would use, 16 to 22-year-old, neither in the workforce nor in education. And the job to be done there starts with re-engaging. It's not even about where that path will take them. It's literally trying to light a fire, finding some passion, something. It doesn't look like collegiate work quite typically that they care about, because what we know about students in that very constrained world is they need 3 things. They need a passion, anything, almost anything. They need someone who believes in them, so that's our job. And then they need 1 year of normal. Like, everything else gets better if you can give them those 3 things. 1 year of, oh, I hate school, but I love this. I'm learning all this cool stuff, right? And I'm working with a learning coach who actually thinks I'm good. Like, they think I can do this work, and I can have this for a year. And having that normal for a year often means working with our community-based partners in cities like Birmingham, Alabama, where we're piloting, in New Orleans, and in Chicago, to make sure that they're getting all of those other things that constitute normal, which, by the way, could be as simple as not being hungry today, right? Or having heat, a warm place to do the work. But when you put all of that together, it's an incredibly powerful piece. But it makes us as an organization have to think very, very differently about every detail, about every small thing. So if you go to the website for LRNG, which is kind of shorthand for learning, lrng.org, you'll notice that it doesn't look like a catalog of courses or programs. It looks like Spotify, because a 16-year-old in Burma, Alabama understands what Spotify looks like and navigates, and it feels like a world that they understand and value. Sending them to our website, a traditional website with a drop-down menu of programs and academic programs and courses, not for me. So right. So we're learning so much about this work, and I think what I would say about this is, and we've been using this term a lot internally, was to do that work with great humility, because we are learning so much more from our students than any of the work that we're doing internally. Right? We can ideate all day long, but if it's not grounded in the kinds of conversations that Bob and Michael talk about, it almost always falls flat, or at least falls short. It may be good enough, but it's not great, and we're trying to build great for those very particular audiences. So some of you may know that we have this very ambitious program to bring degrees to refugees, and we're working in 5 countries now. We're working in Rwanda, where we've been for 4 years, excuse me, Kenya, Malawi, South Africa, and Lebanon, and soon to expand to Haiti. And in that work again, what I would add to what you said, Michael, is that by getting very focused with humility and curiosity about what jobs need to be done in very precise ways, like break that down really far, like shoes. I'm bringing one of our refugee students. I'm going to Kenya next week to the Kakuma camp. I'm bringing a pair of shoes. So, like, not usually in my job description, but I'm going with a pair of size 12s. This happened to be my size, because he's got a job interview and he doesn't have appropriate footwear. He's got to look the part. So we think about all of those things and dig in. What happens is that now we are learning things on the innovation side, and we're being forced, because, as you know, creativity craves constraints. So the constraints of being in a refugee camp is making us think about what we do in ways that I think are actually going to feed the populations that we want to serve in Birmingham, in Chicago, in incarcerated populations, because their constraints in the end are not terribly dissimilar. The constraints of someone in a prison in Louisiana actually don't look terribly different than that of a refugee in a camp in Malawi. So it's very, very powerful stuff. Yeah.
Should we go to questions, or you want? Yeah.
Yeah. So again, it's really fair. We wanted to provide plenty of time, I think, for us to kind of reflect on these together and think about what these mean in our own organization. So yeah.
And while you all are thinking of that, I'll just reflect on one thing that Paul said, because I had the chance to go to Malawi and meet one of the students in the Seleka refugee camp there. And it was fascinating, because the thing that Paul probably won't tell you here is that so this gentleman has built out an entire center where now not only is he taking what he learned from the Southern New Hampshire degree program and the coding that he learned on his own, that he was downloading on off hours on his mobile phone to learn how to code. He's now built a center where students as young as 5, 6, and 7 are learning to become literate and numerate on in computers. And one of the trustees at Southern New Hampshire University has said that they're going to build out the infrastructure to create internet that's always on there, so that these folks now can have jobs themselves and start to bring economic wealth creation into these camps. And it's an example, I think, of understanding the fuller job to be done, that it's not just delivering education, but it's actually changing lives. And literally you go to this camp and lives are being changed because of this full mentality of around a life cycle and what's the progress that I'm trying to make, not just like, oh, we deliver degree programs. So it was incredibly powerful.
I just tell you sorry, because I'm so in love with a student named Remy who, as Michael said, he fled Burundi when his parents were murdered. He was a little boy, and his older brother grabbed him. They literally fled in the night. They left the violence that was happening, the murder that was happening in the village, walked south, walked into south all the way to Malawi, being taken in along the way. Got a cheap device, self-taught programmer as an adolescent, something close to sheer genius, I think. In literally a mud hut, created a school for coding. Then he got a bunch of secondhand laptops through some UN agency, got some servers that he set up. I asked him, I said, how do you get the most recent versions of programs that you're teaching? He said, well, I just kind of stay on top of it. When I think it's changed enough, I buy minutes, and then I go into town and I download it, and I come back and I put it on my servers. expanded because there was so much demand. This is a camp of 40,000, so and less fewer than 1% of refugees get any access to post-secondary education. So expanded, and he has blackboards, and he's got wires running all over the ceiling of this hut. And he goes into the Long Way, which is the capital, about an hour and a half away, I think, Michael, goes to businesses and basically says, I have people who, programmers who want to build apps. They'll build apps for you. And they're building mobile apps for Android in a refugee camp. We're using blackboards and secondhand laptops and servers strung together. So as Michael said, we had trustees on the trip. 2 of them are building him a modern school building, and the 3rd trustee is getting him the internet connection, which is actually much harder than the building.
Yeah, I imagine.
Right, it's $10,000 a year. In Rwanda, we pay $10,000 a month for wide bandwidth. We have an assessment center in Rwanda. But I asked Remy, I said, before we told him what we were about to do, I said, what could you do with an actual Wi-Fi connection? And he said, he almost teared up. He said it would be magic. And he's doing all girls classes for some of the Muslim women and girls in the school. Like, he's just, and this is genius at work. And all our degree did was sort of unlock.
Yeah.
Like, we didn't do him any favors, right? This is him. It's a remarkable story. Sorry, I didn't mean, I gave you the slightly longer version, but I would love you, like, we got to get him here, but you have to get him, he should be in a room like this to talk about the power of what you all do.
Yeah. So where do we want to go? Otherwise, I'll just keep talking.
I'm thinking a lot about the step it up and extend myself jobs to be done. Those are 2 that I'm very, very interested in with the work that we do at Minerva. And I'm curious if you have spent a lot of time thinking about how these jobs to be done get actually framed to students, whether they're traditional students coming out of high school or non-traditional students who, haven't gone through higher education yet, and whether you think there's work that educational institutions need to do to help students understand these are the opportunities that various different kinds of educational institutions can provide them.
Yeah, it's a great question. And I'll be curious, Paul, your reaction. But my sense is that our hope in the book, let me step back a little bit. So Bob's work historically has been with the suppliers, right, of products and services and innovators, helping them build things. And so he's responsible for something like $3.5 billion worth of products and services out there in the economy today. And this is the first attempt, I would say, to go to the demand side and try to make what is in the subconscious of people's mindsets, why are we doing something? We tend not to know or be able to verbalize that, and to try to make that conscious for people who are reading this work. And then from there, there's a whole bunch of advice in the book of these are ways we would approach the education question, and these are guardrails that we would be mindful of as you're selecting, right? We can't obviously divine everything from just these 5. There's tons of subsets that you would ideally want to dig into with your population and who you're working with. But my sense is that you can teach the thinking so that people can understand, where am I in life right now and where's next? I will say within this room that having had interesting offers over the last few years for various jobs myself, having had this language in front of me, I was able to say, like, that's super exciting, but I'm actually not there right now. It's not the right fit for me because of the progress I'm trying to make in these ways. And I'm not going to jump for that because it would be the wrong thing because of these circumstances. So my sense is that you can start to teach that and then allow people to have a sense of greater agency and ownership over their own lives. And I think what we don't write about in the book, but I think is a big miss in the K-12 education system, is we actually ought to be helping people frame their own journeys through these much earlier so that they can build what Paul was talking about, the passion, purpose, those big questions, so they develop deeper whys and intrinsic motivation so that they're much more productive when they get into the higher education step. And I think we need to do a much better job as an education system preparing that ground. When you get to a place like a Minerva or something else, I think you can absolutely affect that still there. It's something I think we should be doing earlier, even with students. And my sense is, a big recommendation that comes out from the book is a lot more students ought to be taking what we call gap years today. I've started to call them discovery years, but because they're going because someone else expects them to go. They're going because they're running away from something, and they're not ready for that college experience. And we need to find ways in society to actually have them have the room, space, time, and money to be able to do some exploration and learn about themselves so they can move toward a place where they can productively consume that experience and do something with it. I think the Extend Myself, Step It Up, tremendously productive places to engage in education. But you know, a lot of 18-year-olds, frankly, are not there. And a lot of the 18-year-olds we interviewed who were in Step It Up, they hire the military because with their Step It Up is, this isn't me in this education setting, and I need to step it up. And so the military is a way that they feel like they can do that, which, you know, I think we could do more to craft educational experiences that don't think through courses, frankly, to start to move them along a trajectory and figure out, you know, how they can step it up themselves as well. But at 18, it's awfully hard to be able to know, you know, this is my path, I want to go there, and so forth, I think.
Yeah, I actually, when we set out to grow what is the majority of what we do, which is online and non-traditional age learners, we recognized, because of Jobs to Be Done work, that what we had built for the campus would not work for them. I am increasingly convinced that what most of us do on campus doesn't work for them either anymore. That we are now seeing a next wave of learners who look at traditional classes and courses and go, meh, like I'd take a better option, I'd take a different option. Kurt Cullenbrander's here, joined us from MIT with the task of rebuild. We have a new College of Engineering, and you know, their task is to really radically reinvent engineering education. Because if you taught music the way we teach engineering, no one would touch an instrument till their 4th year. They'd probably all drop out. And we build sort of learning based on weeding people out as opposed to inviting them in. I mean, just a million things wrong with the model. And you know, I'm sure all of you know the research on high impact practices. Rarely does the class impact. And yet, that is the mainstay and the currency of so much of what our educational delivery looks like for traditional age students and non-traditional for that matter. But I think we now are challenged to look at the job to be done for the student who wants to step it up or who wants, whatever their pathway is, if they're going to be successful, we're going to now have to think about really very different models, and they are more open to it. I'm going to be chairing the ACE board next year, and I don't know if we've made this research public, so don't please tweet it out. I'll get in trouble. But it probably is, you'll start nodding if you've heard this, but we have seen the steady drop in the public sort of perception of higher education. This year we saw the steepest drop, 20 percentage points. And while it has been strongest among Republicans, it is now picking up momentum among Democrats as well. And I've had opportunity in the last 12 months or more to speak to colleagues at some of the most prestigious universities that aren't Dartmouth. So I'm not implicating Dartmouth. They might say this as well, but what they have said is it gives them unending anxiety that they are now seen as part of the problem, not part of the solution. I think they've kid themselves. I think to some extent they've always been seen as elite, sometimes elitist, but now they're actually seen as part of the problem. And I would argue that the Varsity Blues scandal only confirmed, was a vivid illustration for the public of what they always suspected, which is the game is rigged. So higher education for a kid, in my case, once a kid, who was an immigrant and first generation, who had parents with 8th grade educations, was the American dream. It was a trajectory, right? It was transformed my life. Some of you heard me tell this story, so I won't bore you again. Far less of America now believes that about our industry. We are now seen as the industry that burdens young people with debt. Fair or not fair, I think it's much more nuanced than the public narrative. We were once seen as locking opportunity, and now people are seeing other ways to unlock opportunity. And we did this, I wish I had it, we did this great video with our young learners in Los Angeles through LRG, where we work with homeless kids and kids who have timed out of the foster care system. We interviewed them. You know what the constant refrain was? Hate school, love learning. We are challenged, I think, to discover new delivery models that look very different in many instances. It won't have to look different for some portion of kids who still want what our traditional campuses offer, but I would argue we would be dismayed at the degree to which students are coming to traditional residential undergraduate campuses actually don't care a whole lot about what the learning model looks like. They're here for the coming of age model. Yeah. Getting the learning model is table stakes for them. Yeah, like I assume you're going to educate me and I assume I'm going to get a job, right? You're going to reassure me that I'm going to get a job at the end of this. But tell me again, like, where, can I make the varsity team? When do I look? Like, tag along on an admissions tour sometime and listen hard to all the questions that are being asked. It's really about the coming of age experience.
Nick, go ahead.
Earlier today, we were asked to stand across the back of the wall, and on this side, you stand on this side if you believe that in 10 years there won't be, mega changes in the traditional four-year degree, and you stand on this side if you thought there would be mega changes in the traditional four-year degree. Where would each of you be standing relative to the wall?
You want to go first?
Yeah, I'd be closer to the mega changes because I think it's happening now. Our industry is being blown up in many ways, and we're hard to kill. We're a regulated industry. We're more like healthcare than we are like industries that have gone off the cliff that Clay talks about so much in his books. But I think our world is changing, so I think four-year degrees will still be important, and I think traditional institutions will still be important, but we will see much greater range and granularity of credentials. I think we will see a much greater range of providers, and they won't all be institutions of higher education. And I think we will see something that looks closer to an ecosystem than the highly fragmented kaleidoscope of an industry we have today. If we don't see that, I think we will be failing what the country needs from us.
So I'm with you on that, and Nick, probably not a surprise since we've written together on this topic. But the one thing I will say goes to what Paul was saying earlier, which was the help me get into my best school, and to some extent the help me do what's expected of me students. They are anchors in the traditional system. I think the question is, what is the percentage of the population that is still in those jobs? And our book does not, we don't know the answer to that. We haven't done that research to figure out the intensity of the different jobs, if you will, that we found. But a lot of the students who are in the help me get into my best school, not all of them to be clear, because my best can mean lots of different things for different people. They want the traditional college experience. They want the coming of age experience. They want to reinvent themselves with new people. They want the classic brick and mortar experience. They want to belong to a place with a great reputation and prestige. These are the forces, literally, when you break it down, this is what they are saying and following when they make their decision. And so that suggests for a certain percentage of schools, that brick and mortar campus experience not going away. The question is how many of those schools fall into that. And when you're in the help me do what's expected of me job, which shares one force with the help me get into my best school job, which is it felt like the next logical step. That's not a ringing endorsement of why I'm going. It's just like, oh, well, I'm going along because that's what I'm supposed to do. How long does that persist? And I think the attitudes you see, that job to be done in my mind is largely built around social forces. It's far less emotional and functional. It's basically around societal expectations and constructs of what a young person should do when they leave high school. If society's views of higher education are changing, as the research seems to suggest it is, and employers change also, that's going to change the narrative and it's going to change options. And so I think that's going to be a big part of this. And frankly, in the research, of the students we surveyed, if you were in the help me do what's expected of me job, 74% transferred or dropped out. 58% were totally dissatisfied with the experience and said it was a waste of time and money. If you were in help me get away, similar numbers. The others actually had really good success rates, like really good. It was like 88% in help me extend myself, 78% or something and help me step it up, help me get into my best school, even though it might be the wrong reason for an admissions officer. It was like 83% success. But like that understanding of why and starting is really important as you chart this. And it suggests to me, again, like it's not going to go away for a subset, but the question is how big is that subset?
And then layer on the fact that close to half of our fellow citizens say they can't come up with $400 for a car payment or an unexpected medical expense. So we have a business model now that it's just terribly far out of reach of so many people.
Jonathan, one of my readers of the book.
And first off, congratulations.
Thanks.
The scandal that Paul mentioned, and then also the existence of this sort of help me do what's expected of me, seems to indicate there's another set of people with a set of jobs to be done, which is parents. And
Yeah.
I know that your research wasn't on that, but any insight from your work that says how much those converge or diverge?
Yeah. So I wish we had done parents. We've done it in the independent school landscape. Don't tweet any of this stuff. But there's a group of parents who, when they choose private schools in the K-12 level, they say, help me execute my plan for my kid. That is the job to be done. There's three others that are more gratifying.
I hope so.
But that is a big part of it. And I think that combined with the get into my best and this sense of expectation and logical next step creates the conditions of this rat race where you feel like I just got to do everything for my kid, and this intense pressure cooker in certain communities and social expectations of how it makes me look, right, relative to others in my community, that causes this sort of behavior. And I mean, it's insane, I think, to a lot of us. I mean, the disowning your children to get financial aid, like I couldn't have thought of something that good for a novel. But it, I think it comes out of this societal pressure that you see. And I think that's part of what's reflected in the Help Me Get Into My Best, is that I'm actually not the agent making the decision at some level. I mean, I am within a certain construct, but if I leveled up, it's because my parents have just said this is what's going on next. Not everyone is like you that can give their kid a gap year, I guess. But I think that's a huge part of it, and that parent drive for the best at any cost, so I can talk about it with others, seems incredibly important underneath all the stories from my perspective.
I'd also add, for parents, I think there is now almost Darwinian anxiety over the sense that the world of work is changing so fast, and I was going to say looming impact, but we're feeling it today. The impact of AI, automation, there are no safe bets anymore. So what's the right job, right field, what job will still be around, what school will get my kid that job? So while there's always been a sense of college is a ticket to a good job and a good life, that feels much more, I think, unsettled and unmoored. So
I totally
now
agree.
the anxiety levels are through the roof.
Yeah, and I would say that parents, by the way, that language of I go to college to get a job that shows up on the UCLA freshman survey, my instinct is that parents actually are saying that. That is a big piece of it. And that anxiety is so much of jobs to be done. It's what's causing people to have friction and fear of making the leap to an unknown. And I think the anxiety is through the roof right now on this. Mark? Yeah.
So this is okay. So I'm fascinated by this. Help me get into my best. So I'm in the middle of this right now.
Yeah.
And leaving aside the principle whether it's a job, what I experience when I see in my daughter is an experience of thinking that she wants to go to a school that has a certain area. No, it's not really a job, but I think I want to be neuropsychology, and that tends to be a very important sort of notion of what school she might be interested in, also where she thinks she wants to go. It may change 5 or 10 times between now and graduating, but the principle, the importance of that, and changing it from saying it's not about jobs, but it is often, I think, very important for kids to think they have a thing they want to get to. And I'm surprised that isn't really something that you're suggesting is important as part of this.
Well, so some of them are, help me step it up is very clearly linked to a job, right? But let me reset it a different way. The teen participation rate in the labor market is at its lowest in our nation's history right now. The summer job has all but disappeared from American society. Less than 30% of high schoolers hold a job, a paying job. So they can use the language of job when they see it on a survey, because they say like, yeah, it's something my parents talked about. I know I'm supposed to say that. Yeah, it's sort of mixed in there. I'm not saying it's absent. Please hear me. I'm not saying it's absent. But they don't know what a freaking job is. They have no idea or concept of what's out there. They have no sense of the different pathways. And the history of K-12 education reform over the last several years, for a lot of the good I think it has done in shining the light on the atrocity of lack of achievement, I think has narrowed the curriculum in really unfortunate ways to prevent kids from having a lot of those experiences to build a sense of who am I? What is my purpose and passion? So I think that's actually a really important antidote to what we're seeing in some of these things, what you're saying, and that your daughter can even start to think about those questions. Most of these students really can't outside of a very surface level understanding. And it's not, and then you look at how they make a decision. So there's a student in the book, Naomi, who she says she's super bent on becoming a nurse. She chooses a college that has no nursing program. So was it really was that really driving her? That doesn't look like it when you actually look at the decision-making. Watch what people do, not what they say. And so that's sort of where that's coming from. I do think this, and again, I think a huge part of this is giving people purpose and passion, not that they know exactly what they're going to do, but that they're intrinsically excited about something. And my sense is, and we don't have this in the book, but that if you dug into the Help Me Get Into My Best School, there'd be like lots of flavors and sub-segments and personas of that. So there'd be some who know exactly what they want to do and they want to get in the best med school, right? Like or best pre-med program. And then they would have that train laid out for them. There's some people who I think are intrinsically motivated by the quest of learning itself, and it's not necessarily for sort of running the rat race to be better than someone else reasons. And then there's a subset of people that just want to be better than somebody else. Frank Bruni writes about this really well, I think, in his book, Where You Go Is Not Who You'll Be, where he talks about how there's a strong set of students who, like, what they really excel in is getting into stuff. And they're good at getting into college. They're good at getting into the clubs once they're in the college. They're good at getting into the classes once they're in college. They're good at getting the job at the investment bank or the consulting firm once they're in the college. And then they have no idea what they want afterwards. And one of our colleagues, Richard Price is here, but Alana Dunnigan, who went to the business school, Harvard Business School, says is her counselor or coach or whatever for careers at HBS said to her, the people that never get off the get into my best are the people that are the most miserable as they live their lives, because they never realize that there's more to life than just sort of beating other people. But there's a whole set of folks that just sort of experience that job over and over again and never get off that train. So I think, to your point, developing something intrinsic can be incredibly valuable. And I don't think we had enough of a chance to dig into that one in particular to sort of surface those nuances that would. And so, if you're using this on your campus, I think it's a good high-level template. We'll have surveys and things like that to give you more information and figure out what percentage of your students are in what and yada, yada. But then I would get in and do the observational work that Paul's team has done. I would do the interviews. I would dig in to figure out what does it look like? What's the flavor of the students coming to my campus, and what does that mean for how I design and build experiences?
I haven't had a chance to read the book, but I am curious, was there a particular segment that you felt was being unserved or underserved, and in the spirit of sort of skating to where the puck is going, if you could focus in on one area, it would have a profound impact? Yeah,
it's a great question. So I'll tell you, the book, in terms of who we talk to, it literally reflects higher education, and not what New York Times readers think higher education is, but like literally higher education across the gambit. It's, it represents age 17 to age 60 of who we interviewed. Racially, it mirrors what American college goers look like. It lacks international. We'll say that. It mirrors, I think it might actually oversample on first-gen students, and it oversamples in terms of college goers on lower socioeconomic. It's sort of split between the 5 quintiles if you look at the research. So that's sort of what we have in our database to pull this out. I will say that demographics are not predictive of what job you're in, but they're a really helpful way to get at all the different situations to figure out what are the jobs. In terms of your question, is there an unserved? The Help Me Step It Up to me looks like it's rich still with I think this is what Southern New Hampshire Online is going after, but I think it's still rich with opportunity. particularly as we think of lifelong learning as going to be much more important given all the pressures that Paul was talking about. I just think the amount of opportunity to serve students throughout their lives feels really intense when you read it through this lens. And I joked to Bob, the other one I will say is I joked to Bob when we finished it, I was like, well, I've never had the help me extend myself job because I've got 2 kids, 5 years old, and a mortgage, so I'm not going back to school. And he was like, no, Michael, your version is like hiring a podcast or an online course or like watching a video or reading a book. Like that's your version of that job. I think if we understood these in much richer detail, we could craft a lot more experiences to serve both sides of this personally.
Hi, Michael. I know that there's a lot of fine writers in the room, so this is just kind of a personal writing question. Just in leafing through it, I see that a significant part of it is written in the the second person singular, like some steps to follow. And although you wrote that this is for students, for parents, for counselors, for educators, it really seems like you're talking to prospective students. And so I wonder, just in your writing process, when did you decide to make it very you singular? Yeah. And what was that like to actually be speaking to readers like that?
That is a great question. Gets into all the insecurities of writing. So I will say the voice changed several times through the drafts, and we ultimately went with mixed voice throughout the book. Once we decided to write a book, so we did this research, the Gates Foundation funded it at the Christensen Institute, and it came back and I started looking at these stories and I was like, holy cow, this is fascinating. Like we need to tell the stories and we need to get this this advice out for learners themselves. And then sort of in my head, partially because of where I am as a parent in my own life right now and what I'm reading, and part of what I thought the book screamed out for was to go self-help, really genre. So you know what I've been reading. And then and then Jane's in the audience. She understands. I got twins, so I run away. So so that switched, and then when we did our first version of the manuscript, or at some point, maybe it was the version actually you read, Jonathan, I can't remember. It was less so, and one of the feedback came back like, "This is great for Harvard Business Review, but if you really want to reach, you got to pull into this a little bit deeper." So we totally woodshedded the organization of how the book worked then, and really worked to simplify and get to the essence of what we were trying to pull through, and like you said, reach directly to the learners. My gut is that parents are more likely to read this, and then I hope that as they do so, they realize, oh, wait a minute, it's not just for my kid, it's actually for me as I'm an adult in this ever-changing world as well. Matt?
I'm curious for both of your perspectives on the responsibility of educators to help break the mold of people's perception of what job is to be done by education. I know a lot of people who were experts in getting into things, and to some extent, I think it was the fault of the schools that they went to that indoctrinated them into that idea and socialized them into that. And maybe they would have been better served by a school that put more emphasis on the kind of learning you were talking about, Paul. But people who don't love school but are really activated by learning, if that were the values that they heard from the presidents and from the provosts and the faculty, they would indoctrinate that idea, they would absorb that idea, and they would pass along that idea. But because of the hierarchies, because of whatever messages they've taken from us, we've kind of told them the wrong thing. And to me, it reveals like a potential limitation of the jobs to be done theory, which is, in the original theory, people are hiring the milkshake for nutrition on the way to work, but it doesn't take into account, like, did McDonald's have a responsibility to reduce the calories in the milkshake and give you something more nutritious in the morning? We're in this position where maybe we should be giving you something more nutritious in your education, not just assuming that you're going to buy our product. And maybe we need to be more active and less passive in receiving, and be less hired and do more of the shaping, the molding, behavioral economics.
You think? No. Well, I think, yeah, no. It's part of the problem is I don't think higher ed's very much built for students. I don't think we have a genuinely student-centered industry. Students are customers, but I don't think we're built for them. I think they feed the machine in many ways. So if we were generally built for students, we would be having different sets of conversations with them and their parents, if we're thinking about 18-year-olds, but any student, about where their best choices lie, and I think we would be better at it than we are today. I would love to think that we would in the future be able to think about a learning sort of ecosystem in which we would curate individualized pathways that really make sense for a student in the ways that you suggested, as opposed to what we do now, which is we create for much of higher ed this allure of getting in, and we mask merit, we mask discounting as a merit aid, so people feel good about the letter that comes in. And then we put them on a track that looks like pretty much the same track for everybody else who is in that particular major and in that particular cohort of learners. I sound so down on it, but I just think that this is an antiquated factory industrial age model that doesn't make sense for the world in which we increasingly find ourselves. In that world, we would then be able to say this, that we would be accepting, embracing, and we would have a real responsibility to think about what's just the right path for just this right learner in front of me, taking into account not only what they think they want to do or the job to be done, but all the other constraints that they live with. So can we get them through this program without debilitating debt? How much debt do they want to take on? What are the other urgencies? Is a first job more important than a degree? Would a 6-month learning experience that gets them a job that eventually gets them into a scaffolded pathway make way more sense than what we do all the time, which is sell 2- and 4-year degrees, mostly 4-year degrees. 2 ways are just milestones in many cases. So sorry, but I think we are far, as an industry, we are far, far, far from that ethical stance that you describe.
So I agree strongly with Paul. The other thing I just say, sort of from a theory perspective, to answer that part of your question, again, it's what's the progress an individual's trying to make in their context. So we have a part in the book where we say we might wish that the people who are buying milkshakes, your reference to McDonald's, were hiring it to be healthy, but they weren't. That was the last thing on their mind, right? And so the question is, understanding their job, can you deliver something that's healthy that helps them still make the progress that they alone are trying to make? And if you try to shove something down someone's throat that they're not hiring to do, they'll go elsewhere. And so jobs, again, it's not normative. It is what life is, right? It's not what we wish it looked like. It's how they're actually living life and the trade-offs that they're making in their circumstance. People know they should exercise. People know they should quit smoking. People know they should do certain things, and they don't. Okay? So you have to understand the jobs that they have and then design with that in mind around it. Now, just two other points, which is context gives meaning. So if the context changes, the jobs can change too, right? And so I think to your point, if we start reshaping what education looks like top to bottom in the lines that Paul's talking about, I suspect the jobs to be done will change over time. And it's a dynamic model in that way, right? Like what you're reading today, I hope to God is not what the jobs are 10 years from now. Like I hope there's been evolution in it. And then the last reason that I think this is true, there's a model that we didn't get into in the book called Kano's model of performance improvement. And it basically, the very short of it is that there's 3 kinds of features in the world. There's basic features that if it's not there, you're literally just, you're out. So think about driving a car, for example. If it doesn't have brakes, you're not buying the car, right? There's performance features where the more you invest in it, the more there's a return on it for both you and the people that are consuming the experience. So I'm going to not come up with an example right now, but anti-lock brakes actually for a while was a performance feature. Like the more you invested in the safety of those, the more I was interested in buying your automobile, right? And then there's excitement features and things that like, oh, did you know it has heated seating, right? And you don't advertise about that stuff is what the model shows us in relation to a job, but it's something that delights at the last moment as you start to consume something. And the really punishing thing about Kano's model is that it changes over time. So what at one point is an exciting feature over time becomes a performance feature, and over time that becomes basic. It's something that I just expect, right? When seatbelts were first put in, that was a performance feature. Now they're just expected. It's a basic thing. And so all to say that all these things keep changing in the context of how we interact, so that if we improve what we offer from higher ed and society changes in different ways, we would expect these things and we would hope that these things would evolve over time.
I just want to add one thing, Matt, to my point, because it sounds like such a down note. I actually think this is the most exciting time, because in some ways we almost have to break it before we can rebuild something that's intransient as our industry. And there's exciting work going on all over the place. And I think the public narrative now, particularly among those who really are coming down on higher education, is that it's still the old sage on the stage. Like, I don't see that much sage on the stage teaching anymore. I hear faculty talking about all kinds of fascinating ways that they're approaching their students and their pedagogy and the way they're thinking about teaching and learning science. And the work that this group does in particular is pioneering work. So this is actually a really great period. Like, this is the time now we're seeing the new models emerge, and it will happen out of crisis and necessity, because that's how hard change happens. But I think it's pretty exciting what we're seeing today. I agree.
I was just going to go back to where you were talking about so many students today that are coming up, the 18-year-olds, have never had a job, right? Don't have a job. Do you think that is a reflection of the economic situation the U.S. is in, or is it because they're choosing that to get in, and to get into where they want to get in, they know that they need volunteer experience, and they need to be in the band, and they need to be playing football and soccer and all of these things, thus reducing the time they have to work?
I personally think it's both. I'm curious. I think that second thing that you just named, though, is huge in it in certain communities, and then there's the economic realities in other communities that are playing on it. Is my impression. So I think it's an interplay. That's where, by the way, to Matt's question, like, higher ed could do something to shape that context, right, and signal more unambiguously doing these sorts of things might not actually be helpful for where you think you're trying to get into.
And do we give them opportunities to get job experience when we're here, or do we treat things like work study as a throwaway, right?
No, I mean, like, right, if you treated it as something strategic that was built in, it would change dramatically the complexion of what the educational experience would be. It wasn't something that disadvantages me because I have to work, but it's something that actually I'm accumulating learning and credit for as I work, right? That statement just dramatically changes my relationship with the campus and the job I have.
Yeah, I just had a question about, kind of two-part question. Where do employers factor in and influence the jobs to be done? And changing kind of confidence among employers in the relevance of education, how does that accelerate the reduction of confidence that we are seeing already? And how does that, I suppose, accelerate the crisis for change? Is that a 4 or 5 part question? Sorry about that.
Trying to get them all. You want to go?
Matt, the second part of that is, how does the crisis in confidence feed the larger?
About 20% drop. Is it going to be accelerated more as employers say, listen, we're taking credentials like a master's off the requirement?
Yeah, so I think the degree to which that we're no longer paying attention to degrees is overstated. So there are exemplars and they get lots of attention, but I don't think it describes the great bulk of the job market. That said, I think it's pretty obvious that employers don't trust what we produce. And you've seen the Gallup of that study that was 94% of provosts think their graduates are ready on day one, and only 8% of employers agree with them. We could unpack that all day long, why that is so, but there is a pronounced, I was going to say gap, it's a chasm between the two. And sometimes when I'm talking about competency-based degree programs to employers, I'll say, raise your hand if you've hired somebody with a 4-year degree from a reputable college who doesn't write very well. Every hand in the room goes up. And you could go down a whole list of competency groupings, quantitative skills, et cetera, where that's true. For a lot of employers, maybe myth and nostalgia, they believe that 30 years ago that wouldn't have been true, that a college degree was a reliable signal to the labor market, and that it's no longer a trusted signal, which is in part why they are moving upstream to more selective institutions, because a lot of the value of a Harvard degree is the acceptance letter, because it says you're smart. So I think that's that would be my answer. So yes, it's exacerbating. It's making it worse.
Just two other observations. I think employers have created some of this construct where we feel like we have to go because we have to go by requiring the degrees. And so the counterintuitive thing, right, is that if they drop that requirement, I wonder if it would actually cause some really healthy innovation and people being more demanding of the students themselves, that is, of where they're going to force some of these changes in higher ed that I think could create a more student-centered culture ultimately. The second thing I would say, this is something that not what I expected, but there's another, so Help Me Do What's Expected of Me in our research anyway had two personas fall out of it. One was largely the 18-year-old who's just going to college because they feel like they should. The other one was actually an employee in a company who felt like their employer was paying for the experience and they weren't sure why, but they felt like, well, they're paying for it. My mom always said that she'd love to see me with a bachelor's degree. I mean, might as well, right? It's literally right, exactly. I guess that's what's expected of me, although I can't see why it's relevant to me. I don't think that's the kind of employer partnerships that we really want to drive. And so I'm a little, what I've taken out of that is I've been a big sort of boosterism historically of like figuring out employer pay models. And I'm not sure I think that's a too simplistic of a way to go at this, because you want that to line up all the way through, right? Where the motivation is obvious all the way through. And I'm worried we're not hitting on that right now.
Matt, I'd suggest that I think you could argue that what we're seeing the most movement on this would be high-end tech skills and low-end jobs where you see movement towards skill-based hiring, because the degree just doesn't feel as important if they can have reliable verification of skills.
The reporter.
Really good, Jeff.
Oh, all right. I don't know if this is the best final question to leave on or not, but it is one to think about for me as I think about this whole framework, which is where do liberal arts and kind of general education fit? And I can imagine in a way an argument that they fit into either what you're expected to do or what you're extending yourself. But did you actually, Michael, hear people talk about any of those things? And is that part of the challenge in the conversation around the liberal arts right now, is that they don't feel like they fit into the jobs to be done? And what does that mean? So how's that for a final?
Yeah, so I'm a big person that thinks that this whole careerism versus liberal arts thing has been way overplayed, that we're sort of creating a false dichotomy in the world. I'm also someone who's reading almost all the way through Minerva's book, The Intentional University, which I highly recommend for folks that are trying to think about this question. I think it's a groundbreaking book. But let me answer it in a provocative way, which is what we often see in not just higher ed, in all markets, is that suppliers use their language to talk at customers, and it's not the language of the customers and the progress that they're trying to make. I'm not convinced that liberal arts is the language of people who are not in higher ed. We didn't hear it a lot. I think that's an argument we're having on the supply side as opposed to demand side innovation, if you will. I don't know.
Yeah, for sure. And I don't know if it was an ACE study, but it was one as an ACE board meeting in which it was cited that when the general public was asked about all of those sort of skills and knowledge that we associate with liberal arts, but it wasn't called liberal arts, it was something like 65, 68% like, yep, that's exactly what I want my kid to have. As soon as you called it liberal arts, it dropped to something like 25%. Exact same list, right? So we got a marketing issue, to Michael's point, and the language we use. And having sort of just finished up a tenure on the Academy of Sciences Board on Higher Ed and Workforce, right now there's a hiring crisis. We know there's going to be this dramatic impact of automation and AI. It's already happening. If you take a look at the projections from at least a fair number of people about what will be valuable, they will be distinctly human skills that are associated with the liberal arts. And those technical skills that now have so much favor actually will increasingly be automated. So programming would be a great example. Boot camps are kind of a hot topic, and everyone loves boot camps, coding boot camps. Not clear that we're going to have a lot of coders in the future. But we will for the next 5 to 8 years, 10 years, who knows. But so there's a good case for liberal arts. It just doesn't make a very good case for itself.
And that is actually a wonderful place to conclude. So thank you both so much. Thank you.